So I want to show you this. So this is another part. Of course, there's a pipeline involved. Of course, there's got to be some energy involved, some oil, some gas, something. And so this is from the American Prospect, and it says Nord Stream pipeline snarled in the U.S.-Russia fossil energy war. But this is from last December, right? So this discarded sanctions over Nord Stream were attempted protectionism for U.S. gas producers. So they're trying to – so what's happening is Russia sells, I think, 30%, maybe even 40% of the energy supply to Europe, and that's not good for the United States, right? And so they want to protect our gas interests. It's selling to Europe. This is real. So watch this. So there's a pipeline. It's called Nord Stream 2, and the pipeline was built to send gas directly from Russia to Germany, bypassing Ukraine and removing a source of income, as well as a strategic choke point for the former Soviet state. In May, President Biden lifted sanctions that Congress and former President Donald Trump placed 2 years ago. Remember, Trump was supposed to be in bed with Putin? Here he was sanctioning their frickin' pipeline, and which was 95% complete when Biden took office. It was finished in September, and now it awaits certification from German regulators. Echoing criticisms are Ted Cruz. He warned that Russian President Vladimir Putin has built the pipeline so then the Russian tanks can ride into Ukraine. Now, why would Ted Cruz want to say that? Well, the senator from the Permian Basin, who has emerged as the pipeline's toughest critic, has another reason to oppose the infrastructure for Russian gas, preserving the European export market for U.S. liquefied natural gas. So, oh my God. So there you go. So they wanted to stop that pipeline from Europe to Germany, a direct pipeline that goes around, that cuts out Ukraine, and they wanted to stop that. Why? Because there's a big liquefied natural gas market for the United States there. And beyond Texas, senators from other oil-producing states, such as North Dakota. Isn't that interesting that big oil-producing states have slammed the pipeline, also citing national security? The strategic priority makes sense, given that the U.S. outflanks Russia as the top exporter of natural gas. Despite the pandemic, U.S. producers in 2020 saw the highest natural gas exports on record. So this is about gas money, baby, fossil fuels. Freedom gas, remember, as Energy Secretary Rick Perry dubbed the fuel, has been explicitly pitched to European producers in recent years as an alternative to Russian energy. Perry, who is also the former governor of Texas, told reporters in 2019 that after freeing Europe from Nazis, the United States is again delivering a form of freedom to the European continent. This time, he said, rather than in the form of young American soldiers, it's in the form of liquefied natural gas. Freedom gas, baby. Now, even as it looks to decarbonize its power sector long-term, Germany plans to ramp up its reliance on gas over the next decade. The country's new governing coalition, which includes the Green Party and the pro-business FDP, they have agreed to build gas-fired power plants as it aims to retire coal by 2030. Expectations of Nord Stream's impact on global demand for liquefied gas could influence the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the regulator that approves gas drilling facilities. So what they're saying is that they're afraid that the Federal Regulatory Agency that approves gas drilling facilities might not approve them if there isn't the market for it in Europe, right? So that's what they're afraid of. Okay. Those expectations were jolted on Tuesday after a call between Biden and Putin. The United States would be willing to use the pipeline as leverage against Putin's military buildup on the border of Ukraine. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters at a press conference. Sullivan added, if Vladimir Putin wants to see gas flow through the pipeline, he may not want to take the risk of invading Ukraine. So you know we don't give a shit about the people of Ukraine. So what is our strategic interest? Well, there's one of them. In Europe, the debate over U.S. sanctions is viewed as a play not only for energy security, but for lucrative energy markets. violating territorial sovereignty even as they claim to preserve it. Sanctions are an aggressive instrument in a fossil energy war, says Claudia Kempfert, an energy economist at DIW Berlin. She told the German newspaper Handelsblatt, she said both Russia and the United States are using natural gas as a political weapon. So now you know the rest of the story. So, Aaron, can you confirm this for me? So now I saw a news report. Tell me if you can confirm this, that the reason, so when Biden lifted the sanctions that Trump had on that pipeline, he said, okay, Germany, you can start doing your pipeline and have gas flow, but under the condition that if Russia assaults Ukraine militarily, you have to stop your gas coming from. Now, is that part of that? So maybe that's why you find out that Joe Biden didn't want to negotiate. Maybe you find out that's why they've been letting this happen. Maybe that's why you find out the United States actually wanted this to happen, and they're glad that Putin did this in a sense, because now they get to stop that Nord Stream pipeline. What do you say to that?
Well, first of all, let me add one more motive to this U.S. aim to block Nord Stream 2. So on top of the fact that, they help gain more profits for the U.S. energy industry, there's another added bonus that they can block Nord Stream 2. They prevent Russia from being further integrated into the rest of Europe.
That's right.
And if you're a hegemon and you thrive off constant confrontation, and Russia is one of your prime enemies, and Russia is a deterrent to U.S. hegemony, having Russia being more integrated with the rest of Europe is a disaster because it reduces the chance of conflict. It means people will be less likely to get on board with you as you try to impose more sanctions or even try to start a war. So blocking this gas pipeline, I think, was a very high priority for U.S. hegemony, not just because of energy industry profits at home, but also just because it helps enforce the U.S.-run system. And on your point about did this factor into Biden's agenda, I think it's totally reasonable to speculate, especially given what we know now. When Biden took office, something happened inside Ukraine that hasn't gotten reported very much, but it's worth paying attention to. It was reported by Time magazine a few weeks ago by a journalist named Simon Schuster. He reported that as soon as Biden came in, Zelensky offered what a top aide to Zelensky called a, quote, welcome gift to Biden. And that was shutting down the three main opposition TV networks, all of them aligned with Russia, taking them off the air. And that's a move that the U.S. embassy at the time cheered as a wonderful move, which is an odd reaction when supposedly we're supposed to believe that Ukraine is a democracy. But the Zelensky aide is saying that this was done as a welcome gift to the Biden administration to fit with their agenda. Not long after that, the opposition leader inside Ukraine, the main opposition leader for the pro-Russian party, he was put under house arrest. And all this was done to please the Biden administration. Why would the Zelensky administration go out of its way to take opposition pro-Russian television networks off the air to please the Biden administration? Well, the answer is if the Biden administration wants a confrontation with Russia. And Time magazine also reports that not long after all these things happened, Putin saw this as a direct assault on him because his allies in Ukraine were being attacked. And that's when the first of the Russian forces sent to the border started amassing. This is in 2021. So you can actually speculate that the first Russian forces to start gathering on the border were a reaction to the crackdown inside Ukraine that was inspired by the Biden administration. Fast forward to more recently, some other interesting things have happened that have not gotten very much attention. There have been these talks for a long time under something called the Normandy Formula, convened by France, Germany, and Britain to basically try to save the Minsk Accords. That's the peace agreement that was reached in 2015, 7 years ago, that would solve the fighting in the Donbass. The basic bargain is the pro-Russian regions demilitarize, they give up their weapons. In exchange, they get autonomy. Now, if they have autonomy, it means one bad thing for Washington neocons and far-right fascists in Kiev. It means that Ukraine can't join NATO. So basically, Minsk would ensure that Ukraine is at peace and neutral, which I think is a very fair bargain given you have a divided country. And it's insane to put a hostile military alliance on Russia's borders. But the U.S. has put no pressure at all on Ukraine to implement those accords, even though Ukraine signed on to them.
You mean the Minsk Accords?
The Minsk Accords, yeah.
Right.
And so up until a few weeks ago, there were talks under the Normandy formula to try to save Minsk. And what happened at the most recent round of talks? It's basically a week ago. What happened? Zelensky announced that he would refuse to negotiate anymore with the rebels. So he would no longer be negotiating with the side that he's fighting. And if you're not going to negotiate with the side you're fighting, then there will be no peace. So contrary to everyone saying that Putin has sabotaged Minsk and all this stuff, it was Zelensky who decided to sabotage Minsk. Now, he faces some pressure at home. There are far-right pro-Nazi forces that have held demonstrations where they threaten to Maidan coup Zelensky if he makes peace. So he is under pressure. But the problem is the U.S., if they wanted to, could step in and say, we have Zelensky's back. We support the Minsk Accords. And that would send a very strong signal to tell the far right to go away, because the U.S. has a lot more power, but they haven't. And there's no way Zelensky would negotiate with the rebels, get either the blessing or a direct order from Washington. So Zelensky, and with Washington's blessing, sabotaged diplomacy right up until the end, even though Putin had all those troops, even though there was the prospect, obviously realized, of a Russian invasion. The prospect of making peace with Russia and offering a neutral Ukraine just couldn't be tolerated inside Washington. And that's why we have the disaster that we're in now. There's one more thing too. Zelensky went to the Munich Security Conference a few days ago, and he said that Ukraine will possibly pursue nuclear weapons once again.
Yes, I saw that. It's crazy.
It's crazy. And so, I don't know exactly what Putin calculated. Maybe he's been planning to do this for months. It's also possible that in the end he snapped and he said, fuck it, these people, there's no hope with these people. And he just went ahead and did it. But regardless, the U.S. had multiple opportunities to prevent war. And at every step of the way, they encouraged confrontation.
And so what do you, so he's going to Kyiv, or I still like to say Kiev. He's going to Kiev. So is he just going to occupy the whole country? I thought he would just try to secure the Donbass and protect those people who are being slaughtered by the Nazis.
Yes.
That's what I thought. But he's actually going to Kiev. And what do you think his end game is?
Yeah. And by the way, Jimmy, when we talked before about what other options Putin had, that's another one. If you really feel like you have to use force, that's the only way to protect these civilians in the Donbass who, again, we have to say they've been under heavy shelling for 8 years, and they exist, and their suffering and their death is real, and they're ignored completely. If you really felt force was the only answer, he could have just gone there to protect them, but he didn't. He went a lot farther, and now he's in Kiev, and I have no idea what Russia's plans are. But look, a lot of people are suffering. People are fleeing the country. It's awful. War is terrible, and that's why it should be avoided at all costs. But insofar as we care about our own government and our role in stopping wars, we should have been demanding for years that the U.S. basically reverse its coup policy, allow Ukraine to be neutral, stop insisting on bringing Ukraine into NATO, when we also knew, by the way, it never would even happen because France and Germany are very opposed to it, and pressuring Kiev using leverage we have to make peace. Instead, Biden treated Ukraine as a personal piggy bank where he was so influential back in 2014 that Burisma felt the need to give Hunter Biden, who is, let's just say, is not an energy expert, a lucrative board seat. That tells you something about how powerful Joe Biden was. And after that, in the years since, the Obama administration and then the Trump administration, instead of making peace, Trump actually flooded Ukraine with even more weapons than Obama did. Obama, after launching the coup, had some sense. He realized, oh shit, I've just launched a war and the people we're arming are neo-Nazis, and I don't want to further inflame that. So he resisted calls from all over Washington, including from Bill Taylor, who, if you remember, he was one of the stars of Trump's impeachment, who was urging Obama to send more weapons to Ukraine. And he called Obama's policy of not sending weapons appeasement. Well, Trump came into office and everybody was calling him a Russian agent. So he has no principles. So he said, sure, I'll show him I'm not a Russian agent, and I'll send them all the weapons they want. It didn't matter anyway, but it did have the impact of making this proxy war even worse. And now we're in this today. And nobody on the not nobody, but look how hard it is for people from Bernie Sanders on down.
Bernie Sanders. So
acknowledge that there was a coup. And it's on tape. This is not
This isn't a
controversial
speculation. This isn't
Yeah.
our conspiracy. This is a fact. We know what happened.
But people are so, I don't know what it is, Jimmy. They're afraid of being called a Russian agent. They have other agendas. I don't know, but people are not willing to speak the truth. And it's weakening the progressive position. It makes it's like if you concede all the talking points
I know.
to the neocons, then you don't have much to work with.
I know. It's what that we've seen this time and time and time again, Aaron, and that's why there's no left in America. I keep telling people, we're a right-wing country for a reason, because the lefties like to repeat CIA talking points on the regular, and they're nutless wonders who will never stand up, and they will always fall down for the easiest infiltration tactics by the left. I just want to show you some reactions. Here's Richard Wolf says its security threatened. U.S. invaded Afghanistan, Iraq, far from U.S. borders. Its security threatened. Russia interferes in next door Ukraine. Differences, yes, and similarities too. This is from Benjamin Norton. Russia's intervention in Ukraine has gotten much more coverage and condemnation in just 24 hours than the U.S.-Saudi war on Yemen has gotten since it started nearly 7 years ago. 377,000 Yemenis have died. U.S.-backed Saudi bombing now the worst since 2018. Nobody talks about that. People talk about how Biden has somehow the moral authority to sanction another country as he's occupying Syria, committing a genocide in Yemen, and bombing Somalia, with plus all the other shit they're doing. Okay. It's the height of American exceptionalism to be actively participating in multiple genocides across the globe and to think you are the moral superior to anyone. So let me see what else we have. Alan McLeod says, the outrage you're feeling now is the outrage you should feel when the United States bombs or occupies a country, which is every day. That's very well said. Here's one more. Saying the U.S. government is still a far worse offender in the mass military slaughter department than Russia will be met with hysterical shrieking and the rending of garments now, but it's still indisputably true, and if you disagree with it, it's because you're propagandized. It's 100% true. Opposing NATO and standing for its disbandment, understanding the geopolitical history of Ukraine, nor remembering the constant attacks on its own people by Ukrainian armed forces and militia in separatist areas does not make one pro-Putin. Very well said. There's a few more.
Jimmy, by the way, listen.
Go ahead.
It's, there's also not a fair comparison even between what Russia is doing right now and what the U.S. has done elsewhere. Again, first of all, we understand the reasons behind what Russia is doing. I'm not justifying it, but there are reasons. And it is a much different situation than the U.S. going across the world, not on its borders, to launch military missions like in Iraq and Syria. Russia is doing this on its borders in a country where it has deep historical ties and where there's a whole people who speak Russian and identify with Russia. But even tactically and target-wise, as we're speaking so far, and this could change, of course, Russia could kill many civilians. As we're speaking right now, Russia has so far targeted military sites. So far, as we're speaking. When the U.S. goes into Iraq, Libya, Syria, they're not targeting military sites. They're destroying whole cities, like in Fallujah, in Raqqa, in Mosul, decimating them. Thankfully, we have not seen that so far inside Ukraine. We have seen, of course, having some civilian casualties. Some civilian buildings have been hit, but at least from, as I understand it, and if I get this wrong, if I turn out to be wrong in the end, I will totally apologize. But as of right now, the main targets have been military.
So here's one more tweet. If for 25 years I warn you not to cage a badger and you do it and the badger finally lashes out, don't call me a badger apologist. Here's from Garland Nixon, friend of the show. Woke warmonger Democrats, love and prayers to Ukrainian Nazis. F the poor people in Yemen, Iraq, and Libya. Look at this. So it says, Putin's decision to invade Ukraine offers an unexpected opportunity for the United States to deal decisively with Russia in a way that always advances U.S. strategic objectives in Asia. Caitlin Johnstone says, oh, well, that's a lucky coincidence. Turns out it worked to America's advantage to refrain from taking the zero-cost step of promising not to add a country to NATO that it never wanted to add anyway in order to prevent this war. Here's one more. We'll go one more from her. She says, I wonder if the U.S. having solid intelligence that refusing to make this zero-cost move would provoke a war that benefits U.S. hegemonic interests had anything to do with their refusing to make that zero-cost move. I'm not exactly sure where everybody has been living, but our government didn't care about the Kurds, doesn't care about women in Afghanistan, and doesn't care about the people of the United States. They don't even, and about the people of Ukraine, they don't even care about the people in America. That's 100%. And here's my favorite. If you don't support Ukrainian Nazis, you're a right-winger. So that's how we're going to cover it here at the Jimmy Dore Show with the help of award-winning journalist Aaron Maté. If there's anything else you'd like to add to today's segment?
Let me add one more thing. The person who I think laid out best exactly what has happened was William Burns, who is the current director of the CIA. And back in 2008, he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia. And he wrote a cable that we know of thanks to WikiLeaks. So thank you, Julian Assange, titled Net Means Yet, where he reported his conversations with top Russian officials who told him very clearly that this ongoing NATO expansion is a red line for Russia and that Russia is one day going to react. This is back in 2008. And one of the reasons that they laid out for why they will have to react is they said that if Ukraine is given NATO membership, that will definitely divide the country, possibly spark a civil war, and that will force Russia, given its deep historical, cultural, economic family ties, to choose a side and possibly intervene on its side. That was a warning back in 2008 from William Burns to the Obama administration. And it's exactly what has happened. And so the U.S. has known the consequences of its policy ever since, but they've continued to pursue it. And the saddest part is, for all this talk about standing by Ukraine and caring about Ukraine, they had no intention ever of defending Ukraine once Russia ultimately launched the response that the U.S. provoked. And that's exactly what's happened. They've essentially let Ukraine be taken over by, in the armed forces at least, by a strong contingent of neo-Nazis. That's a dominant force inside Ukraine, thanks to U.S. support. And they've let Ukrainians be used as cannon fodder in their proxy war with Russia. And that just makes this thing all the more criminal.
Agreed. Here we're doing stand-up in Houston and Dallas on the 24th and the 22nd of March, and we're doing stand-up in Los Angeles March 4th and 6th. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all our live shows.